Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. Today we're talking about something the tourism boards and expat influencers don't want you to hear. Right now, thousands of Western retirees are quietly packing their bags and leaving the Philippines. Not for vacation. Permanently. And most of them are leaving worse off than when they arrived. According to recent data from expat forums and visa agencies, the average Western retiree lasts just under 2 years in the Philippines before returning home. 2 years. And the reasons why should concern anyone thinking about making this move. Today's story comes from Henk, 62 years old, a retired logistics manager from Rotterdam in the Netherlands. He had a solid pension, a clear plan, and he did everything the YouTube videos told him to do. He researched, he budgeted, he joined all the Facebook groups. And 2 years later, he's back in a one-bedroom apartment in Rotterdam, wondering how it all went so wrong. Before we get into Henk's story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. If you've retired abroad or thought about it, hit that like button and subscribe. This might be the reality check you need. All right, here's what Henk sent us. I need you to understand what my life looked like in Rotterdam, because without that context, you won't get why the Philippines seemed like the answer to everything. I was 60 years old, 2 years from retirement, sitting in my apartment on a Tuesday afternoon in February, looking out at gray sky and gray buildings and gray streets. Everything in the Netherlands is gray in February. The light, the people's faces, the mood. I'd been divorced for 4 years at that point. Amicable split. My ex-wife Mariki wanted to travel and reinvent herself. I wanted stability and quiet. We sold the house, split everything fairly, went our separate ways. I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment in Rotterdam that cost me €100 a month. That's just rent. Add utilities, health insurance, food, transportation, and I was spending close to €2,000 monthly just to exist. My pension was going to be €2,400. I'd done the math 1,000 times. After 40 years of work, after doing everything right, saving carefully, planning properly, I was going to retire into a life where I could afford to exist and not much else. Maybe one modest vacation a year if I was careful. Maybe dinner out twice a month. That was it. That was the reward. My kids were grown. My son Peter worked in Amsterdam, busy with his own life. My daughter Emma was in Belgium with her husband and 2 children. I saw them maybe 3 times a year. We texted occasionally. They had their worlds, and I had mine. And mine was getting smaller every year. I'd go days without a real conversation with anyone. I'd see my former colleague Marco for coffee maybe once every 2 weeks. We'd talk about the old days at the logistics company, complain about politics, then go back to our separate apartments. The loneliness wasn't the dramatic kind you see in movies. It was just this constant low hum of emptiness. Wake up, make coffee, read the news on my laptop, maybe walk to the supermarket, watch television, sleep. Weekends were worse because, at least during the week, other people were also working, so you didn't feel like the only one with nothing to do. But Saturdays, Sundays, just long stretches of gray light and silence, and the feeling that this was it. This was what I'd worked 40 years for. I wasn't miserable exactly. I was just numb and expensive. Being numb in the Netherlands costs a fortune. That's when the YouTube algorithm found me. I wasn't even looking for it. I was watching a documentary about container shipping, something related to my old work, and the sidebar suggested a video. British guy, maybe 70 years old, sitting on a beach somewhere tropical with a beer, talking about retiring in Southeast Asia. I clicked it. Why not? I had nothing else to do. That video led to another. and another. Suddenly, my recommended feed was full of them. Expats in Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines. Guys my age or older, talking about living on €800 a month in places with year-round sunshine. Showing their apartments near beaches that cost less than a parking space in Rotterdam. Eating out every day for the price of a single meal in Netherlands. Getting massages, hiring help, living like they mattered. The Philippines kept coming up. English speaking, so no language barrier. Warm and tropical. Incredibly low cost of living. And the people, everyone said the same thing about the people. Respectful, especially to elders. Hospitable. In the Netherlands, being old means you're invisible. These guys in the videos were talking about being treated like distinguished guests everywhere they went. Being called sir. Having people actually smile at them and mean it. I started watching obsessively, hours a day. I joined Facebook groups, expats in the Philippines, Netherlands, expats abroad, retire in paradise. I read hundreds of posts. Some were warnings, sure. Guys saying, watch your money, don't trust anyone, keep your guard up. But those felt like outliers. Bitter men who'd made bad choices or married the wrong women. The majority of posts were positive. Fishing trips, beach barbecues, photos of beautiful sunsets and cheap meals and smiling faces. Life. Actual life, instead of existing. I started doing real research. Visa requirements for the SRRV retirement visa, healthcare options, safety statistics, cost of living calculators. I made spreadsheets. This is what I do. I'm a logistics guy. I plan things. My pension was €2,400 monthly. According to everything I read, I could live extremely comfortably in the Philippines on €1,000 a month. That meant I'd be saving €1,400 monthly. Saving. While living better than I ever had in Rotterdam. The math was beautiful. My daughter Emma was the only one I told about my plan. She was worried immediately, said it seemed impulsive, asked if I'd visited first, reminded me I'd be far from family. I told her I'd thought it through carefully, that I'd visit first, obviously, that I wasn't stupid. But inside, I was already gone. I'd already sold the Rotterdam apartment in my mind. Already felt that tropical heat on my skin. Already heard people calling me sir and treating me like I mattered. I bought a plane ticket. 1 month in the Philippines to scout locations and see if the reality matched the dream. January 2022. I landed in Manila, and the heat hit me like walking into a wall. Not just heat. Humidity that made my shirt stick to my back immediately. The airport was chaos. People everywhere, announcements in Tagalog, the smell of unfamiliar food and sweat and tropical air. After the sterile quiet of Rotterdam, it felt overwhelming, but also alive. That's the word. Alive. I took a taxi to my hotel in Makati. The driver talked the entire time in English, asking where I was from, what brought me here, telling me about his family. In Rotterdam, taxi drivers don't even make eye contact. This guy treated me like we were old friends. The traffic was insane. Cars and jeepneys and motorcycles weaving through each other with no apparent rules. But people were smiling, waving at each other. Honking, but not in anger, just communication. It was chaos, but friendly chaos. I spent a week in Manila. Too big, too polluted, too expensive by Philippine standards. But I processed my SRRV visa application, opened a bank account, got a sense of the systems. Everyone was helpful, patient with my questions, called me sir, asked if I needed anything. Even the security guards standing outside buildings in the heat would smile and greet me. When was the last time anyone in Rotterdam smiled at me on the street? I couldn't remember. I took a bus down to Dumaguete, 6 hours south, a university city on the coast, medium-sized, not too touristy, English-speaking because of the universities, close to beaches and diving. The expat Facebook groups recommended it highly. When I arrived, I understood why. It felt manageable, clean, palm trees, the ocean, mountains in the distance, warm but with a breeze, people on motorcycles and tricycles, small restaurants everywhere. It felt like the right size. I found a guest house near the boulevard and spent 2 weeks just walking around, getting a feel for the place. I'd have coffee at the same cafe every morning, and the staff started recognizing me, remembering my order, asking how I slept. Small things, but they added up. I found a small house for rent. 2 bedrooms, basic furniture, small yard, 5 minutes from the ocean. The landlord wanted 10,000 pesos a month. I did the conversion on my phone, about 170 euros. I nearly laughed. My parking space in Rotterdam cost more than that. I met other expats at a place called Hayahe, a little bar near the water where foreigners gathered in the evenings. Americans, Australians, a few Europeans. Most were older, retired. They'd been in Dumaguete for years. They told me about the best places to eat, where to buy groceries, which doctors to see, how to get things done. They seemed happy, relaxed, tanned. They had routines and communities and purpose. One guy, an Australian named Robert, had been there 8 years. He said he'd never go back. That Dumaguete had given him a life he couldn't afford in Sydney. I asked him about the warnings I'd seen online, the stories about scams and being taken advantage of. He shrugged, said, "Sure, it happens, especially to guys who come here looking for young girlfriends or get involved with the wrong people. But if you're smart, keep your finances separate, don't flash money around, treat people with respect, you'll be fine." He'd never had a problem. Just lived simply, made friends, enjoyed the weather. It sounded perfect. I flew back to Rotterdam at the end of January. My apartment felt smaller, grayer, colder. I couldn't stop thinking about Dumaguete. The warmth, the smiling faces, the house near the ocean for 170 euros. I looked around at my furniture, my books, my life accumulated over 40 years in the Netherlands, and all of it felt like weight. Anchors keeping me stuck in a gray, expensive loneliness. It took me 4 months to do it. I wasn't impulsive. I made lists. I consulted with a financial advisor who said, as long as I kept a cushion of savings and didn't touch the principal, the plan was sound. I had about 85,000 euros in savings beyond my pension, emergency money. That would stay untouched. The pension would cover everything. I talked to Emma again. She was still worried, but could see I'd made up my mind. Peter didn't really care. He was wrapped up in his own life. My ex-wife Marieke thought it was a wonderful idea. Said she wished she'd done something like that. I sold my furniture, gave away books, donated clothes, put the few things I wanted to keep in storage, sold the apartment. Everything I needed fit into 2 large suitcases and 1 carry-on. I was 62 years old, and my entire life fit into 3 bags. That should have felt sad, but it felt liberating. I was shedding weight, shedding the gray, shedding the cold and the loneliness and the expensive numbness. May 2022, I landed back in Manila with a 1-way ticket. Took the bus to Dumaguete. Moved into the little house I'd arranged to rent. Bought a fan, some basic kitchen supplies, a cheap motorcycle for getting around. Total setup cost maybe 500 euros. My landlord helped me with everything. His name was Rodel. Mid-40s, friendly, spoke good English. He introduced me to his family. His wife made me pancit and lumpia as a welcome gift. The neighborhood kids would wave at me when I drove by on my motorcycle. Old men sitting outside the sari-sari stores would nod and smile. For 3 months, I felt like I'd made the best decision of my life. My daily routine was simple. Wake up without an alarm. Coffee on the small porch. Motorcycle to the boulevard for breakfast. Maybe swim. Read a book. Meet expats for lunch or dinner. Watch the sunset. The heat took some getting used to, but I learned to embrace it. Bought lighter clothes. Took afternoon naps during the hottest part of the day like the locals did. Ate mangoes and fresh fish. My monthly costs were running about €700, including everything. I was banking €1,700 every month. The math was working even better than I'd projected. I went to the expat gatherings at Haiahe 2 or 3 times a week. There was a core group of maybe 15 regulars. Robert, the Australian, Jim and Sandra from California, a British couple named Dave and Linda, a German guy named Friedrich, who I connected with immediately since we could complain about things in German together. We'd sit at the same tables, drink San Miguel, talk about the news from back home, complain about the heat or the bureaucracy, but always with humor. Always with this underlying gratitude that we were here and not there. Then people started leaving. It was subtle at first. Jim and Sandra mentioned they were going back to California for a few months to visit family. They never came back. Dave and Linda packed up suddenly. Said Linda's mother was sick in UK, and they needed to be there. Friedrich started coming to Haiahe less frequently. When I asked why, he said he was thinking about going back to Germany. Things had gotten complicated. He didn't elaborate. One night in September, about 4 months into my Dumaguete life, I was at Haiahe, and there were only 5 of us. 5. The rest had filtered away. Robert was there. I asked him directly, "What's happening? Why is everyone leaving?" He took a long drink of his beer and looked out at the dark ocean. Then he said something I'll never forget. "Things change here, mate. What works year 1 doesn't work year 3. You'll see." I asked what he meant. He just shook his head. Said I'd figure it out. That everyone does eventually. You either adapt and accept it, or you go home. I pressed him, but he wouldn't say more. Just told me to be careful. Keep track of my spending. Don't let costs creep up. Don't get too comfortable. I went home that night, feeling uneasy for the first time since arriving. But I pushed it down. I was different. I was careful. I'd planned this properly. I wasn't some impulsive fool. I was a logistics manager with 4 decades of experience. I knew how to manage systems. This was just Robert being cynical. Maybe he'd had a bad experience. Maybe he was tired. It didn't apply to me. That was my first mistake. Thinking I was different. Thinking I was smarter. Thinking the rules that applied to everyone else somehow didn't apply to me. I know that now. But in September 2022, sitting in my little house near the ocean in Dumaguete, paying €170 a month in rent, banking €1,700 every month, I genuinely believed I'd figured it out. I'd cracked the code. I'd found paradise, and I was going to live there happily until I died. I had no idea how fast paradise could turn into something else. The rent increase came in November. 6 months into my lease. Rodell knocked on my door one evening, looking apologetic. He said we needed to talk about the rent. My stomach dropped immediately, but I kept my face neutral. He explained that property taxes had gone up, that maintenance costs were rising, that utilities were more expensive. He needed to raise the rent to 13,000 pesos, from 10,000 to 13,000. That's a 30% increase. In the Netherlands, rent increases are regulated, maximum a few percent per year. Here, apparently, landlords could do whatever they wanted. I didn't want to lose the house. I'd settled in. I liked the neighborhood. Moving would be a hassle. So I negotiated. Told him I understood costs were rising, but 30% was too much. Could we meet in the middle? We went back and forth for 20 minutes, standing in my doorway. Finally agreed on 12,000 pesos. A 20% increase. I felt like I'd won something. Only later did I realize I'd just accepted a massive jump because the alternative was worse. That's how it works here. They start high, you negotiate down, you feel smart, but you're still paying way more than before. 12,000 pesos was about 200 euros. Still cheap by Netherlands standards. My monthly costs went from 700 to 730 euros. Not catastrophic. I was still saving 1,670 euros monthly. The math still worked. I told myself this was normal. Costs rise everywhere. Inflation is global. This wasn't specific to the Philippines. I was fine. Then the electricity bills started spiking. In the Netherlands, electricity is expensive but predictable. Here, my bills were all over the place. Some months 2,000 pesos. Some months 4,500 pesos. I couldn't figure out why. I wasn't using more power. I asked Rodel about it. He said brownouts were more frequent now, so when power came back on, the surge made meters run faster. I had no way to verify that. I just paid. Then he suggested I buy a generator for when the power went out. Said it would save me money in the long run because my refrigerator wouldn't spoil food during outages. A decent generator cost 18,000 pesos. About 310 euros. I bought it. Told myself it was an investment. The water system needed upgrading. Rodel said the pipes were old and the pressure was weak. He wanted to install a new pump and better pipes. Cost was 25,000 pesos total. He asked if I'd split it with him since I was benefiting from the upgrade too. I'd pay 2,500 pesos. He'd pay the rest. It seemed reasonable. That's how he framed everything. Reasonable. Necessary. Beneficial to both of us. I paid my half. Another 215 euros gone. These were one-time costs, I told myself. Once things were upgraded, it would be smooth. The money would stabilize. But it never stabilized. There was always something. The gate needed repainting to prevent rust from the humidity. The septic tank needed pumping. The roof had a leak after a typhoon that didn't even hit us directly, just brought heavy rain. Every few weeks, Rodel had another maintenance issue that required my contribution. Not full payment, always split. Always framed as partnership. We're taking care of the property together, sir. Each expense alone was small enough that refusing felt petty. But they added up. My carefully tracked spreadsheet started showing monthly costs creeping toward 900 euros. I was still saving 1,500 monthly. Still fine. Still worth it. Then I got dengue fever. March 2023. Almost a year into my Dumaguete life. I felt awful for a few days. Fever, body aches, thought it was just flu. Then the fever spiked to 40 degrees, and I could barely move. My neighbor, an older Filipino man named Mang Ben, saw me struggling and took me to the local health center. They did a blood test. Dengue. They wanted to admit me, but the facility was basic. No air conditioning. Beds with thin mattresses, fans that barely worked. Mosquitoes inside the clinic. I couldn't stay there. Mang Ben called Rodel. They decided I needed to go to a private hospital in Cebu City, 2 hours north. Better facilities. Real doctors. Rodel arranged a van. His cousin drove me. I was too sick to argue or think clearly. I just went. The hospital in Cebu was nice, modern, clean, air-conditioned. They admitted me immediately. Put me on IV fluids. Monitored my platelet count. I stayed 4 days. The care was good. I recovered. Then they handed me the bill. 185,000 pesos. I stared at the number, did the conversion in my foggy brain. About 3,200 euros. I had international health insurance. Dutch policy I'd maintained specifically for situations like this. But the hospital wanted payment up front. They didn't do direct billing with foreign insurance. I had to pay cash and file for reimbursement later. I went to the ATM in the hospital lobby and withdrew the maximum daily limit multiple times over 2 days until I had enough pesos, handed over a massive stack of cash, got my discharge papers, took the van back to Dumaguete, feeling drained and angry. I filed the insurance claim immediately, sent all the documents, medical reports, receipts, discharge summary, everything. They acknowledged receipt, said processing would take 8 to 12 weeks. 12 weeks? 3 months. And when the reimbursement finally came through, they only covered 60% of the total. Something about the hospital not being in their preferred network, about some procedures not being fully covered under my plan. I read the fine print I should have read before. They were technically right. I got back about 1,100 euros. I'd paid 3,200. I was out 1,300 euros. And that wasn't even counting the van transportation, the meals Rodell's cousin bought for me, the tips I gave to hospital staff, because that's what you do here, apparently. My savings took a real hit for the first time. That cushion of 85,000 euros was now 83,700, not catastrophic. But the trajectory had shifted. I wasn't just saving less per month because of increased costs. I was now dipping into savings for emergencies. And the realization that my insurance didn't actually protect me the way I thought it did, that was unsettling. I started thinking about what would happen if something worse occurred. A heart attack? A stroke? A serious accident? Would I trust the local hospitals? Could I afford emergency evacuation back to Netherlands? Those services cost tens of thousands of euros. I pushed these thoughts away. I was healthy overall. The dengue was bad luck. It wouldn't happen again. I just needed to be more careful. Use mosquito repellent. Sleep under a net. Stay vigilant. I could still make this work. The expat community kept shrinking. Friedrich went back to Germany in April. Didn't even say goodbye properly. Just posted in the Facebook group that he was leaving, wished everyone well. When I messaged him privately asking why, he was vague. Said it just wasn't working out anymore. That the costs kept rising and the hassles kept multiplying, and he missed his family. That it was fun while it lasted. I felt abandoned. These were my friends, my community, my social life, and they were evaporating. New expats would arrive. I'd meet them at Hayahe. Young guys, 55, 60, fresh off the plane with the same excited energy I'd had a year earlier. Talking about how cheap everything was, how friendly people were, how they'd finally escaped the rat race. I'd smile and nod and not say anything discouraging. Who was I to rain on their parade? Maybe it would work for them. Maybe I was just unlucky. But I'd watch Robert across the table and he'd catch my eye and give me this knowing look. Like, now you see. Now you understand what I meant. The costs kept creeping. I wanted familiar foods sometimes. Dutch cheese, decent coffee, real bread, not the sweet Filipino bread. These items existed, but they cost 3 to 4 times what they should. A small block of Gouda cheese that cost 4 euros in Rotterdam cost 15 euros here. Imported. Specialty stores. I told myself I didn't need these things. I could adapt, eat local. But sometimes you just want a taste of home. And every time I bought something imported, I resented the price but paid it anyway. Restaurants started charging me more, not officially. But I noticed. I'd go to a place with a Filipino friend I'd made, and his bill would be lower than mine for the same items. When I asked about it, he laughed uncomfortably. Said sometimes they have different prices for foreigners. that it wasn't personal, that they assumed foreigners had more money, so they charged more. It wasn't on the menu. It was just understood. I felt cheated, but also powerless. What was I going to do? Argue about 50 pesos? Make a scene? One just paid, and felt a little more resentful each time. Transportation costs increased. My tricycle driver, a guy named Joel, who I'd used regularly for a year, suddenly wanted more money for the same routes. Said gasoline was expensive now. I checked. Gas prices had gone up maybe 10%. He was charging me 40% more. When I pushed back, he shrugged. Said other drivers would charge me even more. That I was getting a good deal because we were friends. Friends. I paid what he asked because finding a new regular driver was more hassle than it was worth. Everything became negotiable and then renegotiated. That's what exhausted me most. In the Netherlands, prices are prices. Here, everything was a transaction. Every purchase a negotiation. Every service a discussion. And as a foreigner, I was always on the losing end. Always paying more because I didn't know better, or couldn't argue in Tagalog, or just wanted the transaction to end. I started tracking my actual monthly spending more carefully. Rent, utilities, food, transportation, entertainment, small repairs, health costs, everything. I was consistently spending 200 to 400 euros per month now. Not the 700 I'd started with. Not the 1,000 all the websites and YouTube videos promised. Double that. My savings rate had dropped to 1,000 to 1,200 euros monthly. Still positive, still saving. But the trajectory was clear. Costs would keep rising. They always did here. Then I got kidney stones. June 2023. Excruciating pain. Worse than anything I'd ever felt. I could barely move. Sweating and nauseous and terrified. Mang Ben took me to the local hospital again. They did scans. Confirmed kidney stones. Said I needed a procedure to break them up. Lithotripsy. They could do it there. I asked about the equipment, the doctor's qualifications, the success rate. The doctor seemed offended by my questions, but answered vaguely. I didn't trust it. I was in too much pain to think clearly, but somewhere in my brain, alarm bells were ringing. I couldn't let them operate on me here. I told them I needed to think about it. They gave me pain medication, strong stuff. I went home in a fog. Called Emma from my phone. Told her what was happening. She was scared. Said I should come home. Get treated in Netherlands where I knew the system. Where my insurance fully covered everything. Where doctors spoke Dutch, and I could understand exactly what was happening to my body. She was right. I knew she was right. I booked a flight for 3 days later. KLM direct from Manila to Amsterdam. Cost 920 euros because I was booking last minute. Got a taxi to Manila. Stayed overnight in an airport hotel. Flew home in pain. Medication wearing off mid-flight. Wanting to cry. Landed in Amsterdam. Emma picked me up. Took me directly to hospital. They admitted me. Did the procedure 2 days later. Professional, efficient, compassionate. My Dutch insurance covered everything. I stayed with Emma for 2 weeks recovering, sleeping in her guest room, playing with my grandchildren, speaking Dutch, eating Dutch food, feeling safe. But the whole trip cost me money. The flight, the hotel, medication I had to buy in Netherlands, meals, gifts for Emma's kids to thank them for putting up with their recovering grandfather. Total out-of-pocket around 4,500 euros when I added everything up. And I was away from Dumaguete for a month. Still paying rent on the house. Still paying for utilities even though I wasn't there. Rodel didn't offer any discount for my absence. Sitting in Emma's house in Belgium, recovering, I finally let myself think clearly. I pulled out my laptop and opened my spreadsheet. Really looked at the numbers without lying to myself, without justifying, without making excuses. In 18 months in the Philippines, I'd spent roughly 19,400 euros just on monthly living costs. That averaged 1,078 euros per month, not the 700 I'd projected. Then add the one-time costs. Dengue hospital bill after insurance, 1,300 euros. Kidney stone emergency trip home, 4,500 euros. Generator, furniture, setup costs, repairs, 2,800 euros. Total spending, 28,000 euros. My savings had gone from 85,000 to 57,000. I'd burned through 28,000 euros in 18 months. That's 1,156 euros per month disappearing. If I'd stayed in Rotterdam living carefully, I'd have spent maybe 2,000 euros monthly. That's 36,000 euros over 18 months. So yes, I'd saved 8,000 euros by being in the Philippines, but I'd also dealt with dengue fever, kidney stones, constant stress, rising costs, negotiation exhaustion, isolation as my expat friends left, and the creeping realization that I couldn't actually trust the healthcare system if something serious happened. Was saving 8,000 euros worth all that? Was it worth being far from my family when I got seriously ill? Was it worth the anxiety and uncertainty and feeling like I was always being overcharged? I sat there in Emma's guest room staring at my laptop screen and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, my certainty. The story I'd been telling myself was falling apart. I flew back to Dumaguete in late July. The heat hit me the same way it had the first time, but now it felt oppressive instead of liberating. The humidity wasn't exotic anymore. It was just heavy and exhausting. I took a tricycle from the airport, and Joel tried to charge me 200 pesos more than usual. Said he hadn't seen me in a while. Prices had gone up. I was too tired to argue. Just paid him and stared out at the streets I'd once found charming. Now they just looked worn down and chaotic. The house felt different when I walked in. Smaller, dirtier. There was mold growing in one corner of the bathroom that hadn't been there before. The paint was peeling near the windows. The furniture I'd bought looked cheap in a way I hadn't noticed before. Everything had a thin film of dust and humidity and decay. I spent the first 2 days just cleaning and trying to make it feel like home again. It didn't work. It felt like someone else's place that I was temporarily occupying. I went to Hayahay that first week back. Robert was there. Only 3 other expats I recognized. The rest were new faces or empty chairs. Robert bought me a beer and asked how I was doing. Really doing. I told him about the kidney stones, about going home for treatment, about running the numbers while I was away. He nodded slowly, said he'd done the same calculation about 5 years in. That's when most people either commit fully or start planning their exit. I asked him why he stayed. He looked at his beer for a long time before answering. Said he'd sold everything in Australia, burned his bridges, came here with his pension and his savings, and built a life. Got involved with a Filipina woman. Not romantically, but she managed his household, cooked, cleaned, kept him company. He paid her salary. It was transactional but honest. He knew what it was. He was too old and too settled to start over back in Sydney. The costs there were worse than here, even with all the problems. So he stayed. But he told me, if you're having doubts now, at 18 months, you should listen to them. It doesn't get easier. It gets harder. I started paying closer attention to everything. The way Rodell would drop by with new maintenance requests. The way store owners would quote me one price and locals another. The way my monthly costs kept finding new ways to increase. My electricity bill was consistently over 4,000 pesos now. My water bill had doubled for reasons nobody could explain. Internet service was unreliable. But when I complained, they just shrugged and said, "That's how it is here, sir." August brought typhoon season. We got hit by a strong storm. Not a direct hit, but close enough. Wind and rain for 2 days straight. The roof leaked in 3 new places. Water came in around the windows. The power went out for 18 hours. The generator helped, but it guzzled fuel. When the storm passed, Rodell came by to assess damage. Said the roof needed serious repairs now. Not just patches, real work. His estimate was 45,000 pesos. He wanted me to pay half since I was living there and benefiting from the repairs. I said no for the first time. Told him the roof was his responsibility as the landlord, that I'd already paid for repairs multiple times, that this wasn't my house and I wasn't going to keep funding major maintenance. He got quiet. Then he said, okay, he understood. But if I wasn't willing to invest in the property, maybe I should consider moving. That he had other interested renters who were more cooperative, more flexible. I realized what he was doing, pushing me out. I'd become less profitable, less willing to pay for everything. So now I was a problem tenant. I told him I'd think about it. He left. I sat in my house with buckets catching drips from the ceiling and felt something I hadn't felt since arriving. Trapped. Not trapped by paradise. Trapped by the reality that I'd invested so much time and money and emotional energy into making this work that walking away felt like admitting total failure. But staying felt like throwing good money after bad. I started talking to other expats more honestly. Not the cheerful surface conversations at Hayahay. Real conversations. I met a Dutch guy named Willem at a coffee shop. He'd been in Dumaguete for 8 years. We switched to Dutch immediately, and something about speaking my native language opened a dam. I asked him how he made it work long term. He laughed, a bitter sound, said he didn't make it work. He survived it. Willem told me his story. Came here at 62 with his pension and decent savings. First 2 years were fantastic. Year 3 reality started showing cracks. Year 4 he wanted to leave, but he'd already sold his apartment in Utrecht. Spent too much of his savings on living and helping people, and unexpected costs. Now at 70 he was stuck. Couldn't afford to go back to Netherlands. Couldn't afford to live comfortably here anymore either. He existed in limbo. His house was falling apart. He ate local food exclusively because imported stuff was too expensive. He looked older than 70, gray and thin and tired. He told me most expats who make it past 5 years fall into 3 categories. The wealthy ones, who have enough money that cost increases, don't matter. The integrated ones, who married Filipinas and fully adopted local lifestyle, speaking Tagalog, eating local, thinking local. And the trapped ones like him, who stayed too long and couldn't afford to leave. He asked which category I wanted to be in. I didn't have an answer. I met an American couple, Tom and Barbara, who were packing up to leave after 3 years. They'd loved it at first, too. But Tom had a health scare, needed cardiac tests, didn't trust the local hospitals, flew to Bangkok for proper diagnostics, cost them $8,000 out of pocket. That's when they realized they were one serious illness away from financial devastation. They still had a house back in Oregon, rented out, but they could move back in. So they were going. Tom said something that stuck with me. He said, the Philippines is cheap until it isn't. And when it isn't, it's catastrophically expensive. I started doing the real math, the math I should have done from the beginning. To live comfortably long-term in the Philippines as a Western retiree, maintaining some quality of life and security, I needed minimum €1,800 monthly. That's with a modest place, basic imported foods, health insurance that actually worked, emergency fund for trips home, activities, and social life. And I needed to maintain at least 30,000 to 40,000 euros in liquid savings for real emergencies. Medical evacuation, family crisis, unexpected disasters. My current burn rate was 1,400 euros monthly, plus I was eating into savings for emergencies every few months. At this rate, in 5 years I'd be like Willem, stuck with depleted savings and a pension that barely covered basics. No cushion, no options, no way home. I looked at what it would cost to live modestly in Rotterdam now. Rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a decent area, maybe 900 euros. Utilities, insurance, food, transportation, another 900 euros. Total 1,800 euros monthly. I'd have 600 euros left over from my pension. Not much, but not nothing. And I'd have my Dutch health care, my language, my kids nearby, systems I understood, safety and predictability, and the knowledge that if something went wrong, I had support. The Philippines was supposed to save me money. But after accounting for health scares, rising costs, emergency trips, and constant hidden expenses, I was barely breaking even compared to living carefully in Netherlands. And I was doing it with constant stress and deterioration of health and isolation as the expat community churned with people arriving hopeful and leaving quietly broken. I joined the Facebook groups I'd once posted cheerfully in, but now I read them differently. I saw the pattern. New arrivals posting photos of beaches and cheap meals. Guys who'd been there 2 or 3 years posting less frequently. Guys who'd been there 5 years posting warnings that got deleted by moderators for being too negative. And guys like Willem, who stopped posting altogether because they had nothing good to say and didn't want to be that bitter expat everyone avoided. I searched for exit stories, retirees who'd left. They were hard to find because people don't announce failures publicly. But in private messages, in closed groups, the stories came out. Hundreds of them. Thousands, maybe. Western retirees who'd come to the Philippines for cheap paradise and left 18 to 36 months later, financially worse off and emotionally exhausted. The ones who made it long-term were statistical outliers. The norm was what I was experiencing. The slow grind, the rising costs, the realization that cheap paradise doesn't exist for foreigners trying to maintain Western standards. I made my decision in September. I was going home, not immediately. I needed time to plan properly this time. Sell my things, close accounts, figure out what to do about the rent situation. I told Rodel I'd be leaving at the end of October. He seemed relieved more than anything. Probably already had someone else lined up who'd pay more and ask fewer questions. Selling my stuff was depressing. The motorcycle I'd bought for 35,000 pesos, I sold for 12,000. Everyone knew I was leaving. They lowballed me ruthlessly. The generator, bought for 18,000, sold for 6,000. Furniture, appliances, kitchen stuff, all of it went for maybe 30% of what I'd paid. I lost about 1,800 euros just liquidating possessions. But I needed the cash, and I couldn't ship any of it home. My deposit from Rodel was another fight. He claimed damages, mold in the bathroom, wear and tear on furniture. The roof situation. He wanted to keep the entire 2-month deposit plus charge me an additional 8,000 pesos for repairs. I fought him for 2 weeks, got angry, threatened to post about it in expat groups. He eventually agreed to keep 1 month deposit and return the other. I got back 12,000 pesos, lost the other 12,000 to his invented damages. Another 200 euros gone, but I was too exhausted to keep fighting. The week before I left, I had coffee with Robert one last time. He asked if I regretted it. Coming here, I thought about it honestly. Said I regretted not doing better research, not listening to warnings, not tracking expenses more carefully, not setting firmer boundaries with costs. not leaving after the first health scare when the cracks started showing. But I didn't regret trying. I'd rather have tried and failed than stayed in Rotterdam wondering what if. Robert nodded, said that was a healthy way to look at it. Then he told me something I'll never forget. He said the Philippines doesn't lie to you. The YouTube videos lie. The Facebook groups lie. The expats making money from referrals and real estate commissions lie. But the Philippines itself is exactly what it is. It's cheap if you live like locals live. It's expensive if you want Western comfort. It's beautiful, but hard. It's friendly, but transactional. The problem isn't the Philippines. The problem is the gap between the fantasy sold to retirees and the reality of actually living here long-term on a fixed income with aging health and dwindling options. I flew out of Manila on October 28, 2023, 18 months after arriving full of hope. I'd spent 33,000 of my 85,000 euros in savings. I was going back to a one-bedroom apartment Emma had helped me find in Rotterdam. Smaller than my old place, less nice neighborhood, but 850 euros a month with everything included. I'd be more careful this time, budget strictly, rebuild my savings, live quietly. The flight back felt different than the flight over. No excitement, no anticipation, just exhaustion and relief. As we lifted off and I watched Manila's lights disappear below, I felt lighter. Lighter than I'd felt in months. The heat was gone, the humidity, the constant negotiation, the worry about health, the isolation, the creeping dread. All of it stayed behind with the tropical air. I know what some people are thinking, that I failed, that I wasn't tough enough, that I should have adapted better. Maybe that's true, but I also know I'm not alone. The data backs this up even if nobody wants to talk about it. The average Western retiree in the Philippines lasts under 2 years. Most leave quietly, some leave broke. The success stories you see online are either very wealthy, very integrated, or very good at hiding the reality. Welcome back. Hank's story is one of thousands happening right now across the Philippines. The great retiree exodus that nobody talks about because failure stories don't get clicks like paradise videos. But the math is clear when you actually run it honestly. For most Western retirees, the Philippines looks cheap until you factor in healthcare gaps, quality of life expenses, rising costs, emergency trips home, and the hidden price of constant stress. The ones who make it work long-term usually have specific circumstances. They married locally and fully integrated. They're independently wealthy enough that cost increases don't matter. Or they're willing to live completely local lifestyle, with local food, local health care, local standards. For the average retiree expecting Western comfort at Asian prices, the dream collapses around year 2, right when the initial excitement wears off and reality sets in, right when the health scares start, right when the costs have crept up enough that you look at your bank account and feel that first spike of real fear. Hank is back in Rotterdam now, living in a small apartment, seeing his grandchildren regularly, speaking his language, using health care he trusts. He's rebuilding his savings slowly. He told me he doesn't regret trying, but he wishes someone had given him the real numbers before he sold everything and moved halfway around the world chasing a fantasy. If you know someone considering this move, share this video with them. Not to crush dreams, but to inject reality. The Philippines can be wonderful, but cheap paradise for foreign retirees is mostly a marketing myth. Comment below your experiences. Subscribe if this perspective helped you. And remember, sometimes the life you're trying to escape isn't as bad as the life you're running toward. See you in the next one.